Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Ukrainian Congress Committee, I'd like to welcome you all to our commemoration of the first anniversary of the full invasion by Russian forces of the territory of Ukraine. Before we start, I'd like to have everybody stand and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. If you please be seated. We're here tonight to commemorate the invasion of Ukraine by Russian forces on February 24th, 2022. But also tonight we're commemorating the Heavenly Hundred, the unarmed protesters who were slaughtered on the streets of Kyiv during the Revolution of Dignity on February 20th, 2014. That was the true start of the war with Russia. After Viktor Yanukovych escaped to Russian territory, Vladimir Putin decided this was a good time to first invade Crimea and then the eastern regions of Ukraine, disguising this as a civil uprising. This attempt at a takeover of Ukraine was halted by the patriotic uprising of Ukraine's population, who with great courage took up arms and halted this invasion, limiting the occupation of Crimea and the easternmost regions of Ukraine in Luhansk and Donetsk. After 8 years and thousands of casualties, Putin was convinced that the time was ripe to finish the job and authorized a full military invasion, he calling it a special military operation, thinking that the Ukrainians would welcome the Russian army and that Ukraine's government would disintegrate within a few days. Here we are, a year later. The people of Ukraine mobilized to fight for their independence and sovereignty, and the government stronger than ever with the full backing of the nation. This tree that just took a tumble is decorated with angels who represent the thousands of victims who have fallen at the hands of the invaders. At this time, I'd like to thank the Township of Union for hosting us, as always. They're very amicable to us gathering here. And representing the town this evening, we have a few committee members. We have Michelle Dellenfort, James Bowser, Manny Figueroa. We'd like to welcome you all, and we ask Michelle for a few words. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having us this evening. We truly appreciate it. Joining me this evening, again, is Committeeman James Bowser. We also have Senator Cryan in the audience, and our Assistant Business Administrator, William Reyes. So on behalf of the Township Committee and our residents, I'm honored to be here today. Every year, we have the privilege of flying the blue and yellow flag in celebration of your independence. However, today, we fly the flag for a solemn reason. It marks the anniversary, as we heard earlier from Roman, of Russia's horrific and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Although at this time there's no immediate end in sight, our support of the people of Ukraine is ongoing and will never waver. One thing that I have learned this past year is the resilience of the people of Ukraine in the face of terrifying odds. It has been a powerful example to myself and to the rest of the world. Today, let us take a moment to pause and reflect and to remember the victims of the war especially those who have lost their lives as a result of this conflict. Above all, today, we stand in support of peace, because that's so important today. We stand with Ukraine today and always. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And also, mentioned Senator Joe Cryan, our representative in the state Senate, is here, and we'll ask the senator to come up with a greeting.
Thank you, Roman, thank you, and thanks for bringing us together in this beautiful hall. Michelle, Jim, thank you very much for hosting today. Bill, thank you for opening up the town hall, because this is a town hall for all the people. And today, while we certainly don't celebrate, we understand that all the people stand with Ukraine, whether they're here in the Township of Union, the state of New Jersey, or in the United States of America. You know, it was a year ago when we looked, and I know you've talked about it, to 9 years ago, really, with the dignity of the 100 lost, with the snipers and the rest. But a year ago, when most of us thought that that Ukraine would fall, and the articles and the discussions were about what happens when that happens. Putin controls the grain. What else does he get when he, you guys recall these conversations, it was an entirely different approach in terms of the conversations we have today. We learned, as Michelle mentioned, not only through flag raisings here, but we learned by watching each and every day the coverage, the bravery, the inspiration, and the dignity of the people of Ukraine to stand up to this war criminal and say no. Roman reminds us, that we were chatting before, that as he puts it, Ukraine was there as a culture and a country when Moscow was a swamp. And we need to remember that we're standing today, not just for today, but for time and tradition and for what things mean to us individually. We watch with empathy and awe as we watch leaders handle themselves like Zelensky. And may I say, I can't tell you, I'm not Polish, but how much more proud could you be than President Duda and the Polish people? Right? Are they you can give that a round of applause. They are really remarkable. Right? I think for many of us, our first images were the refugees, the empty carriages at the train station for the ones who were coming for children in need. And we watch today, and we watch over the past few days for President Biden to come in, and for the President of the United States to take a 10-hour train ride. 10 hours. Think about that for you and me. Imagine that for the President of the United States in the darkness to say, I want to be there, to stand in Kiev, and to say the United States stands with this important democracy, these incredible people. We stand not only in empathy, but we stand together. Roman mentions, and I think most of you would agree, it's great to stand together. Let's get some F-16s and some tanks to go with that, because we know there's more to be done. But in the past year, we witnessed courage. We witnessed people who stood above odds that no one ever could thought possible. And we've realized that democracy is a teetering thing, and that people having the ability to govern themselves need to stand up to a bully, need to stand up to a war criminal who was responsible for the murder of tens of thousands of civilians in a heartless display of what can happen when someone ruthless runs a country and is a dictator for others to fear. Thank God for the Ukraine people to stand up as a light of liberty, to stand up as an inspiration for this entire world. And as we stand here today, let us stand with you, the Ukraine people, because together, with God's good fortune, we will stand here next year and celebrate Ukraine's win on this war that's truly independent. Thanks. Thanks, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cryan. Our speaker this evening, Mykola Hryskovyan, is the president of the Organization for the Defense of the Four Freedoms of Ukraine, in Ukrainian Ochus. He is also a founding member and board of directors member of the Committee for U.S.-Ukraine Relations and is director of their Washington, D.C. office. In his capacity as director, Mykola accompanied a delegation from the Ukrainian Foreign Relations Committee on a fact-finding trip to Ukraine in January. We look forward to hear about Mykola's impressions of this trip. Please, Mykola.
Good evening, everybody. We're gathered here on this solemn occasion to commemorate the beginning of the invasion on February 24th. As everybody noted, this war actually started 9 years ago. And the official start of this war, and this is something that our President Biden mentioned, was 20th of February, the day that he visited Ukraine on President's Day. This is also the day where you had the culmination of the Revolution of Dignity. And that's when the first casualties of this war took place in Kyiv. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. As Roman said, I accompanied a group of experts and people from experts from Congress, people from non-governmental organizations to Ukraine recently at the end of January. But I'm going to back up a little bit because I was part of a group in May of 2021. Okay, that was a few months after President Biden took office, and the group consisted of former security officials from the Trump administration. One of them was an ambassador, right? Ambassador to the OSCE, former presidential candidate on the Republican side. And when I met him, we flew out of JFK, and he said, the reason I'm going on this trip is I want to find out if the Ukrainians are going to fight. Because, you know, Ukrainians are asking for support and all. I want to find out if they're going to fight. And during that trip, right, we went out, our Ukrainian hosts arranged a visit to the city of Mariupol, okay, which all of you know about what happened to it. And they took us out, the soldiers took us out to the front line. We were within 3 kilometers of the Russian line. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and that's the steppe area. And it looked very much like the Ukrainian flag. It was a beautiful blue sky and a field. That's big sky country, if anybody was ever out west. That's what it looks like out there. It looks like the Ukrainian flag, except the fields were green. They weren't yellow. And then the soldiers pointed out where the Russian lines were. And 3 kilometers, that's what, a mile and a half? You know, we could walk that from here, what, in about 10 minutes or so? And then the soldiers took us to another part of that town. And that town, Shirokino, it was a resort town. It was completely destroyed. And they're telling us this is what the Russian world is. You see this, all this destruction? Right? And we had to walk down certain paths because the areas could have been mined, because the Russians would send in drones that would drop mines. You know, so we were very careful there. But then, you know, I'm looking out, and we're looking out over the Sea of Azov, and I'm thinking to myself, imagine standing in Wildwood, and it's completely destroyed. You know, people you see, toys scattered, bicycles, you know, people left there in a hurry. You know, they left all their things behind. You know, things destroyed, ransacked. And it was you had this destroyed town. Like I said, it was a beautiful day. I was looking out over the ocean. And I was imagining the Jersey Shore. Because I'm from Philadelphia, so I go out to the Jersey Shore, you know. And it was very mind-boggling. And the general, right, who was with us, you know, he's saying, this is the Russian world. This is what the Russians are bringing us. Right here. This is a good example of it, right? And less than a year later, we know that Mariupol is completely destroyed. That town is completely destroyed. Okay, they say about probably over 25,000 civilians were killed in that city. Okay. A colleague of mine on this trip a few weeks ago, I had mentioned our trip out to Mariupol, and he goes, you know all those sailors that you were with and soldiers and members of the local government, right? Because they're all dead. All the people you met are dead. And that's the reality of Ukraine today. Now I want to tell you a story about a week before the war. I was with some Ukrainian colleagues, some Ukrainian security experts. And we're meeting with some security experts from the U.S. government. You know, and they were looking at us and they were saying, and they had these big smiles on their faces. And they said, you know, we have a plan for Ukraine. You know, there's a couple of jets sitting in Kyiv, right? And they're ready to take Zelensky away, and we could start an exile government in a NATO country. And then we'll start a partisan warfare against the Russians. And he says, you know, if Ukraine lasts 3 days, it's going to be one level of help. A week, it'll be another level of help. And my colleagues are turning around to me and they're saying, man, you know, everybody here in Washington is really afraid that this invasion is going to happen. And then they started getting messages from their American colleagues telling them, stay in Washington. Your names are on a hit list. You go back to Kyiv, you're going to get killed. And they turn around to me and they go, McCullough, you know, this is really serious. And I go, listen, you guys could stay. I advise you to stay. And I remember my one colleague, he turned around, he goes, out of the question. We're going back. This was 3 days before the war started. And pretty high-level people told him his name's on a hit list. And what happened? The invasion happened. All right, those jets weren't used. And what did President Zelensky say? I need ammo, not a ride. And this gentleman, you know, who would meet in the White House all the time, who was telling us about this great plan, who said if Ukraine lasts 3 days or 4 days, it'll be one level of help. Ukraine, this is the 364th day of this invasion. And the Ukrainians were able to push them back. So in other words, the Ukrainians did prove that they're willing to fight. And this is a real people's war. I remember a few weeks into the invasion, I called a friend of mine. He's a president of a university. And he sent in Kyiv, he sent all his students home. There were some students who couldn't go home because they were from eastern Ukraine, right, where there was combat going on. And he stayed in Kyiv, university professor. Through our For Freedoms organization, we were able to send over some bulletproof vests for him and his colleagues. And I'm talking to him, and he goes, my place is here in Kyiv with the students that stayed. And he goes, McCullough, you have to understand, this is a people's war. Everybody is fighting. Because it doesn't matter if you're Ukrainian, if you're Russian-speaking, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, black, white, yellow, everybody's fighting. Ukraine is a very diverse country, and you have a lot of ethnic groups there. Because everybody's fighting, and everybody hates the Russians, because they see what's going on. And on this trip, I was able to see this. On this trip, we went to Poland first, then we went to Kyiv and Odessa, and then we went out through Moldova. One of the trips that we did, one of our visits in Kyiv, outside of Kyiv, was to the town of Bucha. It's got middle-class suburb. A lot of people from Kyiv have summer houses out there, you know, and it was under Russian occupation for about a month, all of March. Right? A couple of days from February and all of March. And they took us to where the mass graves were. And we saw pictures of what everything looked like. And it's right out of the history books, right out of World War II. There are pictures of men with their hands tied behind their back, lying, shot in basements on the streets. A local priest who was there was telling us about all of this, and they had after a few weeks, the bodies started piling up and stinking, and the local utilities guys turned around to the Russians and said, "We got to bury these people." So they let them bury them, but they only let them bury about 150, and they buried them behind the church. Yeah. And then Bucha was freed, and all of this came out, and we were informed that there's at least 200 of these types of massacre sites throughout Ukraine. 200. Okay. There was probably about 500 people killed in that city, and then there's a city or a town right next to it, Irpin. Another 500 killed there, right? And the first thing, we went to visit the local mayor's office, local government people, met with the deputy mayor, and we as Americans, we asked, well, how could we help? Thinking, how could we help rebuild the city? How could we help with this, with that? And the first words out of this woman's mouth was, we need more weapons. Our citizens from Bucha are fighting on the front right now. We need more weapons. And that shows the resilience that you spoke about. And they said we could rebuild the town later, when we win. Because what Putin wants to see, he wants Ukraine, but without Ukrainians. And whoever doesn't leave Ukraine, he's going to exterminate. Okay, there's estimates, official estimates, that about 250,000 civilians were killed. 500,000 children were kidnapped into Russia and sent into re-education camps. These are official statistics. That's what's going on right now. And every meeting that we had, from the highest levels of government, generals, brigadier generals, all the way down, we were meeting with local volunteer, man-on-the-street organizations. Everybody said the same thing. We need weapons, and we need to win this war. And we need to push the Russians out. There was no talk about negotiations. This is across the board. And what really impressed me, I talked to you about that this is a people's war. We had a meeting with members of civil society or volunteer groups that help the military. They bring food to the military, clothes, warm clothes, socks, various types of equipment that can't be furnished by the army. And we thought there was going to be probably about 10 people there, and we showed up to this meeting, and there's 50, right? And it's all sorts of organizations. There was a organization, people in the arts that went out to the massacre sites and filmed them and took interviews with the locals. There was a veterans organization. Like I said, this war has been going on for 8 years. So these were veterans from 8 years ago who organized themselves to help the present soldiers deal with issues of PTSD, right? There was a group of IT specialists, and this is the most fascinating thing. And they developed an app for their iPhones, for their phones, that goes on everybody's app that goes on everybody's iPhone. And this app is hooked into the air defense of Ukraine. And what the Russians do, they do these mass missile attacks. Okay, and we experienced some of this when we were in Ukraine. And they send 50, 100 missiles at a time to bomb electrical infrastructure. And they send cruise missiles in, and they fly slow and low under the radar. So with this app, right, if you see a cruise missile, right, you just put in your geolocation, right, and it goes straight to the air defense, and then they know where to shoot it down. Everybody has this app on their phone, right? This is millions of people. You know, so this is the whole country. Everybody's mobilized. You know, and like I said, this is a people's war. And the Ukrainians, they call this war the War of Ukrainian Independence. I see you have George Washington here, you know, various other paintings from the era of our War of Independence. And New Jersey played a very crucial role in that War of Independence. There was a huge battle here that was one of the turning points of the revolution, because the Patriots were losing at one point. And they call this the War of Ukrainian Independence. And they turned to us and they said, this is like your war of independence. We're fighting it now. And the impression that I got with the resilience is the Ukrainians are all in, everybody. Tall, short, fat, slim, male, female, gay, straight, everybody is in this war, okay? Because they know that if they're not in, they're going to get killed. So we as Americans, this is our obligation to help Ukraine, because we've always fought good against evil. That's been our history. Okay, we did that. We fought against tyranny during our War of Independence. We fought the Civil War to get rid of slavery, which was a blight on this country. We fought World War I, World War II, and the Cold War for democracy. And, you know, this is our obligation. This is what America's all about. We have extremists on the left, and we have extremists on the right, and these guys are really getting under my skin, right? Where they make all sorts of excuses for Putin and completely, you know, write off that this is a war of good against evil. And this is not the American way, what these people are propagating. Okay, the American way is to help. And we have to remember that in our War of Independence, it was France that came to our aid. Okay. It wasn't just one general, General Lafayette. Right? There was a whole fleet, right? And there was a lot of guns and a lot of bullets and a lot of powder that were sent over from France, which helped our ancestors, right, win their independence. So, with that, I end off with God bless America and Slava Ukraini.
Okay, before we proceed outside to do the flag raising, I just want to give a couple of reminders. I remind everybody and ask everybody to get in touch with your representatives in Washington, our senators and your members of the House of Representatives, and remind them how important it is that U.S. continue their support and for them to please release the F-16s so that we can chase the Russians out of Ukraine. I read an article the other day where somebody was pushing negotiations, and somebody countered and say, as long as there is a Russian on Ukrainian territory, Ukraine's war will never end. So that means there is no negotiated peace. It has to be outright victory. Okay, before we proceed, I'm going to ask Father to give us a closing prayer. Please, this is Father Ehud from St. John's Catholic Church in Valesburg in Newark. Thank you.
I think the prayer for the people in Ukraine is something we can do right away, straight away. And as sure Roman said, everything we need in Ukraine, all those things are important. All the weaponry, not because we want to revenge something, we want to achieve the just freedom for us. And that justice is a really divine thing. God is giving us strength. Our people who are in the front line, our people who are supporting our forces. Fight for justice. So let us pray to our Father that He may strengthen the whole Ukrainian nation, all people, doesn't matter where they are, to fight for justice. Let us pray first in English and then in Ukrainian. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Отче наш, що єси на небесах, нехай святиться ім'я Твоє, нехай прийде царство Твоє, нехай буде воля Твоя, як на небі, так і на землі. Хліб наш насущний дай нам сьогодні, і прости нам провини наші, як і ми прощаємо винуватцям нашим, і не веди нас у спокусу, але визволи нас від лукавого. Бо Твоє царство і сила, і слава Отця, і Сина, і Святого Духа, нині повсякчас, і на віки вічні. Амінь.
Починаємо? Так, будь ласка.
Душу тілом ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу тілом ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!